WALB presents Dialogue, a weekly public affairs program exploring community concerns and spotlighting regional activities.
Good Sunday morning to you, everybody. And you've heard the saying, everyone has a story. And my guest today has a story. He was a 12th round draft pick for the Chicago Cubs in 1984. And about 4 to 5 years later, he was accused of sexual assault and other charges. I am so happy to introduce to some of you. I know lots of you may have heard his story, but Jimmie Gardner is here. He is soon to be 50 years old, I understand, and so happy early birthday to you. And you are from Terrell County, Georgia. You are not bitter, as you say. You are a better person, and a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So people heard my introduction. Yeah. You were in Charleston, West Virginia area, yes. And the question is, how did this happen?
Well, in the beginning, like you said, I was playing baseball for the Chicago Cubs minor league organization. And during that time, it's funny, during spring training, I actually didn't go back to spring training because of financial issues. I wanted a bigger raise. Okay. So I went back to Tampa, Florida, where I was raised at. I left Arizona, which was our spring training, the Chicago Cubs spring training. I went back to Tampa, Florida. So at that time, I missed spring training. And while I missed spring training, to go into a full baseball season, I had to have innings in. So I was sent to Charleston, West Virginia, where that was a co-op. And we didn't have an actual team there, but it was a co-op of a lot of different teams, Reds, Expos, Braves, Cubs, and so we were all together just getting innings in there. And I guess I fortunately had the opportunity to get ready for a season by going to Charleston, West Virginia. And during that time, while I was pitching, some crimes occurred. Like you said, sexual assaults, this and that. And during that time, myself, including all of the black guys on the baseball team, were questioned and interviewed, plus over 150 guys in the city of Charleston, West Virginia. We were all interviewed about the crimes. At that time, fingerprinted, photographed. I interviewed for like an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. And nothing, the officer said nothing matched. You're free to go. So this was in 1987. And in late 1989, I was actually charged with the crimes because they said we made a mistake with the fingerprint. The fingerprint now matches you. Just to give you a little bit of that. That's how I was actually charged and taken to trial on 2 separate counts.
And there were 2 victims.
Yes, ma'am.
And I said other charges, and you did as well. Sexual assault, was it burglary?
Burglary, robbery, assault during the commission of a felony. So
what goes through your mind when you know you've not done it?
Yes, ma'am.
And you are being accused of not 1 but 2 yes. crimes against women?
Yes.
What goes through your mind?
Well, at first, I didn't take it serious because my roommate, whose name was Larry Allen at the time, he was actually taken to the police station, and he was very upset because the police tried to tell him, well, we know you did this. We know you did it. And I was taking it as a joke. You know, it was like, it wasn't really serious. And later on, when it came on to me, I still didn't completely take it too serious because I know I didn't do the crime. Mm-hmm. And I went through the process. I had a public defender I was his first case. And that was
eye-opening?
That was, yes, and I'm in court. I was basically the co-lawyer on the side, his counsel on the side, because it was a process that he wasn't really familiar with. So he was overwhelmed, and we had 2 prosecutors going against us, against him, he and I. Oh, it was a difficult situation, to say the least.
Well, your family, of course, still here in Georgia. Did they come up?
Yes, ma'am. My mother was there. My grandmother was there. My family members, other supporting family members were there. Sisters, brothers. Yes, ma'am. They were there. Well,
we've got some video that I want to play, and this is when you were actually freed.
Yes.
And here you are.
Yes.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my goodness! Oh man!
And do nothing but say thank you, Jesus.
Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you.
I love you, man. I love everybody.
You here?
Love you, bro.
It's over.
Special moment.
Okay, very
That's my
special
mother,
moment. And
Gladys
then
Gardner.
again, I'm not sure if our guests, our viewers heard, but that's your mom. And who
Yes.
else greeted you there?
That's my mother, Gladys Gardner, my brother, Eric Gardner, my sister, Barbara Harrison, my sister, Tracy Sims, a friend of mine who did time with me while I was incarcerated. His name is Chuck Sanders, who I'm hugging right there. He did 21 years with me. He and I, we talked about that moment for a long time. I had no idea he would be there. And he got out last year, and all we talked about, his son is named Morris, and all we talked about was, we're gonna be there when you get out also. Morris would always say, I'm getting my dad out first, then I'm coming to get you.
Wow.
He said, I'm gonna be there the day you get out, and that was remarkable, seeing those guys there.
27 years behind
Yes.
bars.
Yes.
Of course, I'm sure you have access to television and you could
yes.
see what was going on in the world,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
but what are some of the major things that happened in our world that you were not able to take part in, that stand out for you?
Well, the wall came down over in Germany. That was a major event that I missed. And then it's so much that happened. Unfortunately, 9/11, that terrible situation, the Oklahoma City bombing, that terrible situation, it was so many terrible things and so many good things also, you know, as far as different laws, you know, being enacted and different things helping people throughout the country. You know, President Obama becoming president, the first black president, I missed that. Being elected twice, I was in, and not, just to say a little quick tidbit, I had the opportunity to vote.
I believe if we don't have, there we are.
Yes.
There you, I mean, what is that like? That was the first time in your life.
That was very, very
Was it
humbling
emotional?
to me. Very emotional, yes, yes. That
Oh
was
my.
a very significant time for me because I understand what my forefathers and my ancestors went through in order for us to have an opportunity to be over in this country and have the right to vote. What was sacrificed, and I, you know, education is something I thrive on, and I believe in wholeheartedly. And knowing our history, you know, being educated on your history, I've always just liked to be a part of something and give back and understand what the people went through and try to say, hey, I support the cause. Yes.
I'm curious, you know, we see it on television, I told you, you know, I watch all the detective movies and,
Yes.
and the CSIs and all of that.
Yes.
And actually had my first experience recently serving on a jury, which was very much an eye-opener for me.
yes.
We also see the other side, snippets of prison life. How would you sum up prison life?
Well, I sum it up. It's a humbling experience. You know, it's not something I talk about too often because a lot of things occur in prison that aren't good. And then there's a lot of good. You know, I focus on the good, but there's a lot of things that happen in prison that aren't too good. You know, having friends for 20+ odd years, seeing them die off. You know, just it's things that go on in prison, kind of like when you go to war. You know, I've talked to my sister Tracy Gardner Sims, and it's like she's a major in the military. It's like when you go off to war, you don't talk about that type of stuff. That experience. But on the positive aspect, I had an opportunity to meet some great people in West Virginia. You know, in prison and correctional officers and staff members. So I say it was a humbling experience, to say the least.
I want to go back to the, and probably we'll focus next segment more on the accusations and the DNA. But if people will remember, and I do remember this making headlines, there was a gentleman by the name of Fred Zane. You told me he's passed away. He passed away in 2002. But he was actually accused and charged with at least 5 counts of tampering with evidence.
Yes.
Some of the people convicted because of his testimony at this time had been freed.
Yes.
I think you were getting there. But he is the one who handled your DNA. If you can explain that connection.
Well, Fred Zane is the one who said that he handled the actual evidence. And through discovery, which is a process that goes through the judicial system, It's called discovery. We filed for discovery and get the actual raw notes, the raw data. We found out that other serologists had actually done the work. And Fred Zane was called back in. He left from the, he was chief of the serology division, but he left in 1989. And they called him back from Texas for my case and a couple other guys' cases. So he came back and testified and brought his own file with his own results and his initials on documentation saying that he did do the testing, which we found out later on he didn't. But anyhow, he was indicted on my case, me and 3 other guys, but I was one of the cases that he got indicted on in 1998. The case number is 98F106 or 103, I believe. And he went to trial in 2001, September of 2001. And he actually, during that period of time, like I said, September of 2001, the World Trade Center, that travesty happened. And at that time, the jurors were, I guess everybody was frightened, and it ended up being a mistrial. And they were in the process of retrying Zane for the charges for my case, a guy named James Richardson and a guy named James McLaurin. But they actually didn't retry because they said Mr. Zane died in 2002, I believe early, like maybe February, March. So that prevented the process of him getting tried again.
All right. So, of course, like, as I said, we can connect with that because that made headlines.
Yes, ma'am.
And little did we know, that connection, of course, you and your family did. Let me just say this. When your conviction was overturned, the judge on that case called your conviction called the situation a miscarriage of justice. We're going to talk more about, I guess, the testimony from the 2 victims, and also the fact that there may be a retrial coming up. So stay with us, everybody. I'll continue my dialogue with Jimmie Gardner after this. Stay with us. Welcome back on this Sunday morning. I am having a dialogue with Jimmie Gardner. That name may sound familiar. He's from Terrell County, and he served 27 years behind bars for 2 accusations of sexual assault, one of which you were telling me during the commercial break, you were actually acquitted on one. And this was because there were several crimes taking place where you were in West Virginia. But you were acquitted on one, and then the second one?
I was convicted.
You were convicted.
And given 110 years.
And this is the one that Fred Zane, who is the former state chemist, presenting DNA evidence that pins you supposedly to the crime. He himself was charged because he was accused of tampering with evidence,
Yes.
and some of the people convicted as a result of his testimony
Yes.
were freed, and you are free now. Before we go into everything else, there is that possibility that there's going to be a retrial in July.
Tentatively, there's a date scheduled for July 11th by the state. And without getting into the legal ramifications, we're filing certain motions and things on our behalf, on my behalf, my lawyers are filing rather, to try to, I guess, kind of interrupt that process. Okay. So we're preparing for the trial, but we're also making our motions, attacking the evidence, attacking the whole